Hi, Shayla Lanier coming to you for History 530, Liberty University, American Christian Heritage. And for this discussion board post, I chose the article Peddler and Divinity, George Whitefield and the Great Awakening. This article is written by Frank Lambert, and in it he gives a wonderful history about sort of the commercialization of Whitefield's preaching. He talks about that before Whitefield ever arrived in America, 2 years before he ever preached his first sermon in America, there were pamphlets circulating in America. Whitefield had many books circulating, and Lambert kind of makes it seem like there was more of a commercial aspect to Whitefield than a spiritual aspect. But it's interesting because the author of our textbook, Mark Knoll, talks about Cotton Mather on page 77, and he says that he was shamelessly self-promoting, overbearingly moralistic, and his 469 separate books and pamphlets suggest that he never had a thought he felt unworthy of publication. So perhaps George Whitefield had studied Cotton Mather and his effectiveness in part. George Whitefield also had a friend. His name was William Seward, and he's known as the first martyred Methodist. And Seward was a marketing genius, and he was behind Whitefield, especially in the early part of his preaching, in getting his thoughts and his sermons published. Seward, unfortunately, was killed in 1740. He was preaching the gospel in Wales, and someone from the crowd threw a large stone and hit him in the head. He died a few days later, and that was devastating to George Whitefield. But George Whitefield, carried on. Whitefield's sermons were so well known that in the Founder's Bible, which is edited by David Barton and has many wonderful tidbits about everything to do with the founding of our country. He cites a quote by Dr. Rick Cornish on page 1642 in the Founder's Bible. It says, George Whitefield is estimated to have preached to 80% of all Americans. And in his farewell sermon, it's estimated that 23,000 people heard it. Whitefield was so well known that John Adams recounted a sermon that he heard Whitefield preach to John Adams. So, John Adams recounted it to Thomas Jefferson. So he was a pivotal and important figure in the Great Awakening and in the founding of our country. Whitefield did have a spiritual component, though. It wasn't all commercialism. His farewell sermon on Boston Common drew 23,000 people, more than the entire population of Boston. And in his sermon, he said, I offer you salvation this day. The door of mercy is not yet shut. There does yet remain a sacrifice for sin for all that will accept of the Lord Jesus Christ. So obviously, deeply spiritual, preaching the message of salvation and the way to get there through Christ. In this article, Frank Lambert asserts that Whitefield would preach a sermon, and then he would have it published, and it would be sent to the next place he was going. There would be articles in the newspaper. Somehow they would often secure the front page of the newspaper. Just a wonderful marketing genius. But also he used the commercialization for good. His favorite charity was the orphanage that he built in Georgia. He called it Bethesda, and he did have a case for maybe misappropriating the funds. I don't know what the outcome of that case was, but it seems that he used his funds for good and his message for good. And it was a fascinating article and brought to life the commercial aspect of something I never would have considered. Thank you.